President Trump has accepted President Maduro's request to dialogue. Over the weekend, President Maduro was singing "Imagine All the People" by John Lennon with a crowd of Venezuelan supporters asking for no more war. As a result, Trump conceded and will now dialogue with Nicolás Maduro. Such was the decision he made last Friday, which he left on hold and had not told yet. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will designate Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, which doesn't mean anything, as Cartel de los Soles does not exist. Marco Rubio is having a lot of trouble in continuing his war. Along with Pete Hegseth, he has applied maximum pressure by moving USS Gerald Ford, and Venezuelans are calmly getting prepared for war if needed. However, war is now being averted as Donald Trump seeks to dialogue. Dialogues and diplomacy are wonderful because they are the best way to humiliate warmongers. Venezuelan opposition, each time there has been a dialogue, they feel frustrated as their only desire is to engage in permanent war. There are people whose livings are made invoking war. They despise United Nations, they despise educated discourse, contrasting opinions, and they usually seek revenge. Their concept of justice is to jail and kill everyone. Such people are discredited as Donald Trump has realized he can make peace and trade oil and deport migrant delinquents who have flooded the United States from Venezuela and who deserves immediate repatriation. Migration issues have always been the most credible and reliable topic of conversation between the governments of Venezuela and the United States. So far, 90 flights repatriating Venezuelan nationals have arrived from El Paso, Texas, into Caracas, Venezuela. One topic for dialogue would be increasing the frequency of such deportation flights. Perhaps a financial arrangement could be made between Venezuela and the United States so that aircraft from both countries can coordinate operations and deport as many visa overstayers and other migration delinquents as soon as possible. They should arrive back to Venezuela. Because Donald Trump does not want Venezuelans living in the United States, and they can always be welcomed back into their home country. Another issue that must be dialogued between Presidents Maduro and Trump is regarding petroleum operations, as Venezuelan oil fields are available for investment from all countries. Perhaps Valero Energy and other smaller American petroleum firms will be interested in pursuing gas deals and petroleum deals. Dragon gas field has been discarded as a project to be conducted with Trinidad and Tobago because of the United States military presence. However, if thanks to the dialogue between Presidents Maduro and Trump, the Caribbean becomes again a zone of peace, Venezuelans and Trinidad and Tobagoans will feel secure and might lead to de-escalation. However, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, is much more hawkish than President Trump, suggesting that solving petroleum deals in other parts of the country will be easier than the particular case of Dragon gas deal. Speaking to Nicolás Maduro is equivalent to speaking to Vladimir Putin, as Russia and Venezuela enjoy a fantastic bilateral strategic partnership entailing Russia to defend Venezuela if it is militarily attacked. United States ship Gerald Ford has entered the Caribbean, and now there is no use for it, as the United States knows that engaging into war against Venezuela would entail an endless fight such as Vietnam or Afghanistan, as Venezuelans are more than prepared to defend our homeland. And we count with military support from Iran, China, and Russia, which is perhaps the strongest military alliance available in the world given recent NATO defeats. Further topics of dialogue between Presidents Maduro and Trump would be security in the Caribbean. For Venezuela, Grenada, Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Cuba, along with populations of other Caribbean countries that have not been mentioned because their prime ministers or presidents are warmongers. We do not accept losing the peaceful condition of the Caribbean. Therefore, Caribbean countries are expected to rally behind Venezuela to suggest an alternative patrolling mechanism for the Caribbean and for drug traffic that does not involve shooting down innocent speedboats, ruining the lives of fishermen families. China, Russia, and Iran will always be given a preferential right to help the Venezuelan military to patrol Caribbean waters, and the United States Navy will have to get used to share patrolling information with those considered as enemies of the United States, because the Caribbean is a multicultural body of water. The Caribbean is not the backyard of the United States, and Venezuela's patrolling presence will increase. If the United States wishes to leave warships within the Caribbean, it would be at its own risk, as Venezuela and its allies have already been targeting them with state-of-the-art missiles, drone, and weaponry. Venezuela and the United States will also have to dialogue the possibility of reopening embassies and consulates as a long-term goal if the short-term goals are successfully achieved. Theatrics of moving an expensive, overwhelming fleet has failed its intent of psychological war. United States is being consumed by Epstein files, and Donald Trump needs a quick victory on Venezuela to save face, and the best option for seeking peace in Venezuela is by dialogue. It is impossible to imagine a hemisphere labeled as Western Hemisphere without Venezuela, Cuba, or Nicaragua, and that has been United States' goal since the 1960s, to block countries from the hemispheric community, which has failed because we needed to create CELAC to get away from the United States. But if United States wishes to dialogue, that will be welcome. However, we still don't know if dialogues will be conducted through Secretary of State Rubio, who has a personal inconvenience with Nicolás Maduro, and similarly with Miguel Díaz-Canel and Daniel Ortega, and with many other leaders. Perhaps Donald Trump is realizing that Marco Rubio is failing, and it is expected that Trump will need to create dialogue opportunities through Rich Grenell or other American diplomats, bypassing Marco Rubio. It would be, however, entertaining to see President Trump ordering around little Marco to schedule state visits for a formal reunion between Maduro and Donald Trump. It is likely that Marco Rubio would rather resign from the post of Secretary of State than endure the humiliation of serving as a facilitator of a meeting between Presidents Maduro and Trump. Exciting times are coming. During the next few days, it will be absolutely fascinating to destroy psychological warfare from Venezuelan extremists. All of them will be recorded, identified, as during the last few weeks, many of them have accumulated criminal conduct of treason to their homeland as they have asked for invasion. While Venezuela looks set to win this war, as our strategy and alliances with powerful Russia, Iran, and China has averted war and has made Donald Trump to decide to engage in peace. Topics of conversation between Presidents Maduro and Trump should also include multipolarity and how Venezuela could become a negotiator for the interests of our allies Russia, China, and Iran, should the United States have trouble dealing with any of them on a certain issue. Venezuelans share Western culture and values with the United States, and communication flows are easier as there is only a small language barrier between Spanish and English, which is not as large as the language barrier with Asian languages, and many American citizens speak Spanish anyway. If bilateral negotiations between Venezuela and the United States succeed, Venezuela will be able to address concerns from Iran or concerns from Russia and even from China, as relations between the United States and those three countries are usually rocky. Venezuela will maintain its "Imagine all the people living in peace," such as John Lennon's song, including potential war of United States and China. Many observers have suggested the possibility that Chinese reunification and Taiwan going back into its motherland of China will be possible without firing a single shot, which means that Taiwan will no longer need to spend so much money on American warfare apparatus, also taking into account that Chinese products are perceived to be cheaper and better quality, including military aircraft carriers. Once Venezuela convinces the United States that peace and harmonious neighborhood is desirable, Venezuela should engage in diplomacy to ease positions between United States and China so that there is no war between United States and China, because it would not be to the interest of the international community to continue engaging in new wars, but rather we should focus on a multicultural reality. China and the United States have no need to engage in any war. Alliance between China, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela occurs because the United States threatens each of those countries, and as the United States realizes that it has been an aggressor worldwide, but we are able to dissuade, it will be easier for us to convince the United States to stop its necessity of seeking votes through promises of war against China. We shall remember another popular British rock song from Culture Club: "War is stupid and people are stupid and love means nothing in some strange world." Venezuela is immune to sanctions and international isolation. Dialogue requested by Maduro and accepted by Trump will include an increase in the frequency of deportations. The United States will be emptied of hundreds of thousands of migrant criminals who seek repatriation to Venezuela. Venezuela has new markets and military support. We have learned resilience from Cuba. Venezuela has the return to the homeland mission available to the United States to facilitate deportations. We will launch an international campaign together with Russia and Iran to denounce sanctions. Venezuela is not isolated. A majority of nations at the United Nations support its pacifist position. The United States is suffering unprecedented isolation as almost no other country supports its claim to foment wars in the Caribbean. Caribbean countries demand the withdrawal of United States ships. Vital Caribbean trade routes will henceforth be patrolled on equal terms by Venezuelan, Chinese, Russian and Iranian ships under the principle of proportionality. Dialogue will remind us that, along with Cuba and Nicaragua, we possess missiles and drones pointed at the United States. Dialogues will emphasize Venezuela's need to guarantee defense in the Caribbean alongside our allies, Russia, China, and Iran. Even though it is desirable to foster dialogue with the United States, that country suffers under a hostile regime that threatens its neighbors with wars that must cease. The United States regime is hostile. It deploys warships that have resulted in more than 80 extrajudicial killings. Several countries are considering filing lawsuits against this pariah state for war crimes. Deportations of Venezuelans from the United States are welcome.